Hi, I'm Jim with Pour the Juice, and in this video, it's exactly what you see, exactly what you clicked on. The thumbnail says it. It's the Old Grandad Bottled and Bond 7-year review. Um, Picked this up earlier today from a PA Fine Wine and Good Spirits store. It was $39.99 plus tax, which I think is a great price. And I decided, maybe this is a good bottle to do a review on. I know I've done a few on some bottled in bond bottles. Um, but I tend to enjoy drinking bottled in bond. Um, I think they're a good standard for anybody looking to get into whiskey. So I do want to get a few of those reviews out there, especially on something new. Uh, Now, historically, I've liked and disliked Old Granddads in the past. Not the people, the liquor. Um, I first tried Old Grandad. It was a normal bottle of Old Grandad, probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I was not a big fan of it. But I do really enjoy the 114. I think it's a fantastic bottle. It's a fantastic bottle if you're trying to figure out flavor points and to try to taste those nuanced profiles that people talk about. It really helps you with nuttiness that people say in Jim Beam. That's where I first got it, was with Old Grandad 114. But yeah, that was a little bit of history. Me with Old Grandad, me and Old Grandad in general. But I do have my review. Try not to spoil it, but I'll go through everything. And I do have to say, I quite enjoyed this bottle. So let me pull this in. I'm gonna go through everything. If you've watched my reviews before, you know I have a little bit of a different scale. Um, Everything adds up to 100 points, but there's a few different categories. My main category is going to be flavor, of course, and that's broken into 4 subcategories. There's a pleasantness scale, an intensity scale, finish, and viscosity, and those are all made up out of 10 points. So total for flavor is going to be 40 points. Nose is another category that is a total of 15 points, but is broken into 2 subcategories. That's 10 for pleasantness and then 5 for intensity. Value is another category that's out of 15 points. And then we have complexity, balance, and uniqueness all out of 10 points. And the reason why I have more points for some or less points for others is just because I value those things more personally. So I value a lot with bottles that I buy. I'm not gonna buy a bottle and bond whiskey that's $200. I'm just not gonna do it. It doesn't make sense to me. Um, you may, and that's all what you like. But for me, that's a very low value at that point, especially if it's like a 4-year bottle and bond. It's a very low value. I'm not going to spend that much money. So for me, value is super important. And so I'll start there with this bottle. Like I mentioned, $40. It's a 7-year-old whiskey. That means the minimum age whiskey in this bottle, in this blend, is 7 years old. And there probably is older in here. If it's minimum 7, there could be 8, there could be 9, there could be 13, for all we know. So with that in mind, I think the value being 7 years is going to be on that higher range, or that's where I put it, is in the higher range. The 100 proof keeps it a little bit lower, so I can't max out the value category. I went to 12 on value. That's out of 15 points. If this was a higher proof, I would have went higher than that. And so let's get into nose a little bit. Like I mentioned, there's 2 categories in nose: pleasantness and then intensity. It makes up 15 points total. Intensity of the nose, I marked directly in the middle. So I gave 2.5 out of 5 points for that. And that's, really just, I'm putting an average on there. I don't think it's any more intense or less intense than average for a whiskey on the nose. Don't really have much to say about it other than that. Pleasantness, on the other hand, pleasantness is out of 10 points. I give it a 7.5. I think it's very pleasant on the nose. I don't think it's extremely pleasant. I don't think it's average pleasantness, just okay. I think it's somewhere in between. It's a nice nose. It doesn't jump out at you. I guess that would be intensity. But as far as pleasantness, what I get is some brown sugar. I get some of that bean nuttiness and vanilla. For it to go higher, I would need just something extra in there. I would need some fruit, maybe some different sugar components. I get some baking spice. Obviously, there's rye spice in there, but it's not. To me, it's at an 8 is really where you're saying, oh, this is really good. 9 would be great, and then if it's giving it a 10, then you're saying it's the best nose on a whiskey you've smelled, and I just can't do that. So 7.5 is what I gave for the nose. On flavor, and I really enjoy the flavor on this whiskey. There's only one subcategory that it's going to get hurt, and I'll start with that, and that's going to be the finish. The finish on this whiskey, I wouldn't say it falls off a cliff, but it is definitely the least appealing category for this bottle, in my opinion. So the finish I gave a 5 out of 10. So it's going to be completely average. It lasts for a little while, but there is some bitterness, some harshness on the finish. For the rest of the categories, for pleasantness on the pleasantness scale, I give an 8. Actually, I think it's very pleasant. And just some of the notes that I got on here, there's rye, there's citrus, so I did get some fruit on the palate. There's vanilla, like I mentioned before, brown sugar. I heard something else here. I can't see it, unfortunately. Let's see if I can taste it. Oak. That's what I wrote. I wrote oak. I do get some oak. In general, it could be a little bit better. I get some leather in there too. That's nice. But I do think it's very good. So for me, I am going to give it the 8 on the pleasantness scale. For intensity, for a 100 proof whiskey, I do think it's quite intense. In general, it's a little bit higher than average. I gave that a 7 out of 10. And then viscosity, I actually gave it an 8 out of 10. I do think it has a fantastic mouthfeel for being 100 proof. I'm sure the age has something to do with that. Overall, very impressed with the flavor on the Old Grandad Bottled & Bond 7-year. Really enjoy this. So for flavor total, that's 28 out of 40 points. And then, so the last 3 categories are complexity, balance, and uniqueness. Complexity, I did give it an 8 out of 10. Balance, I give it an 8 out of 10. Uniqueness, I gave it a 7 out of 10. So I'll go through all those really quick. This is a quite complex whiskey with all the rye notes that are coming through, the different sugars, the citrus, the vanilla, the oak from the 7-year, and getting some brown sugar and even some caramel in there. It is quite complex. It would be more complex if there was more fruit than just the citrus to me. I think it's a very good whiskey. I think on that complexity scale, it is quite complex. And that's kind of the same way I feel about the balance. Could it be more balanced? Yes, because the finish is kind of out of whack to me. But the rest of the whiskey is so nice. I do think it's very well in balance until that finish, and that's the only thing that holds it back from kind of being greatly in balance. So that's why I give an 8 out of 10 on that. And as far as uniqueness, it's a Bottled & Bond product, so it's a little bit more unique than just putting a whiskey out there. And it's aged 7 years for a Bottled & Bond, which I do think is a little bit unique. But it's not quite as unique as, say, that Old Fitzgerald Bottled & Bond 7-year being the only wheated Bottled & Bond bottle on the market and also being 7 years old. So I had to pull some points away in uniqueness compared to what I gave that bottle, which is why I gave it a 7 out of 10, being a 7-year-old Bottle and Bond. If you wanted to argue and say, oh, it deserves a little bit more, I could see it there. But for right now, that's what I gave it. And in total, that's bringing the score of this bottle to 73 out of 100. For my scale, that's quite good. It's actually coming in at second place of the bottles that I've reviewed like this. First place was the Barrel 37, which got a 78. Now this is coming just above the Jefferson's Cask Strength, which scored a 72.5. It outscores the Old Fitzgerald Bottle and Bond 7-year by quite a bit. You know, that scored a 68.5. So, you know, like I said, I am a bigger fan than I thought I was going to be of this product. And you know, when I went to go pick it up, they have their old bonded on the shelf. They have the 114. This is actually more expensive than the 114. And I was looking at it and I was like, I don't know if I even want to pick this up because I know how much I enjoy the 114. Could this really have a place on the shelf, on my whiskey shelf? And you know, that's the reason why I do these reviews, is to try to figure that out. Based on score, does this have a place on my shelf? And anything in the 70s does have a place on my shelf. I do think it's a pretty good bottle. And if you're kind of on the fence about whether you want to pick one up or whether you don't, if you've tried the bonded, you have the bonded, you weren't that big of a fan, you know, I do recommend it. You know, this is, like I said, 73 out of 100. We're kind of in the mid 70s there. That's my recommendation. Yeah, pick up a bottle of this. I think it's good. But yeah, if there are any other bottles like this, you know, on the cheaper end that you think you'd want to see a review of, let me know in the comments. And if you tried this, let me know what you think. Yeah. Also, please like the video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.